Hello, I'm Eric Wadara, a college game design professor, and I'm going to take you through some of the basics and the introductions to Unity's very many windows. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and we will check out Unity. So I am using the Unity Hub right now, and I'm using Unity 2019.2.1 F1. I'm sure this is going to be pretty similar for most versions of Unity. So I'll just click New, and we will create a 3D project for now. We do not have to create extras. That's going to import a bunch of extra nonsense. I'm going to call this Intro to Unity, and I'm going to make sure I know where it's being saved. I know it's not that important for this particular video, but in general, you want to know where you are saving your files. So I'm going to click Create. It shouldn't take too long to open up. If this is your first time opening up Unity, it might take a little bit longer. But yeah, so my layout might be a little bit different than yours, but just so you know, you can always access everything through this button up here, this window option. So if you go to Window, you can find all of these windows in the many different subcategories, like General. That's where you're going to find a lot of the ones that you need. Then Animation is pretty important a little bit later. UI Lighting is under Rendering, and that's going to be important later on. And the Asset Store is really good to get you up and running. So anyways, let's talk about the default screens that I think everyone should work with. Okay, so I'm going to draw. I don't want the highlight. I want the pen tool. So let's clear this. Okay, so we have up here the hierarchy. Okay, the hierarchy is very important because it's where all of your objects in your scene are going to exist. Okay, I can edit all of the objects in my scene by clicking them in the hierarchy. Okay, speaking of the scene, I have the scene view right here. Okay, I keep my scene window and my game window separate so that I can see both at the same time. Okay, and we'll go through, well, I'll just give an example now. So in my hierarchy, if I right click in the blank space, I can create a 3D object like a cube. And it creates it in the scene view. And in the scene view, I can modify it, right? I can click and drag. I cannot click and drag it in the game view. And this is very, very important to understand early on. You can't modify things directly through the game view. The game view exists to give us an idea of what the game looks like from the player's perspective. The scene view exists to give us an idea of what the game looks like from the developer's perspective. Okay, if I hold down right click, I can use WASD along with E to climb and Q to sync to move and navigate around my screen. Okay, and I can tell already that my main camera is right here. Okay, if you ever lose your main camera, you can double click it and it'll zoom to it. You can also turn on gizmos in order to see things like your camera, the lighting in your scene, and so on and so forth. Okay, on to more windows. Right, now, the next, I don't want to say next most important because all of these windows have circumstantial importance, but one of the next big important windows is the inspector. And the inspector is over here for me on the right. That's where I like to keep it. And what the inspector does is it shows me information about whatever object is highlighted in the hierarchy. Okay, so I have my cube highlighted, and I can draw a line and see exactly in my inspector what's going on with this cube. So for example, we have a cube that is positioned at negative 0.03, 0, negative 4.8. That's our transform of our cube. Okay, well, that's the position of the transform. The camera is at 0, 1, negative 10. So if I wanted this cube to be exactly in the center of the camera, I would change the X position to 0, and then I would change the Y to negative 1. Sorry, 1, yeah. And now we see the cube is in the center. Okay, Z position is forwards and backwards. One nifty way that I like to use Unity is if you click and drag on the letter or on many of the properties in the inspector, you can actually move them. Okay, so position is known as a vector 3. It's like your coordinate plane X, Y, but it also has Z. Rotation is the same. It's a vector. Well, it's actually a quaternion, but we use a vector 3 to represent it. And the way to think about rotations is the axis that you want to rotate around, that's the one that you edit. So for example, in my scene, if I want to point the cube towards the camera a little bit, I know that my X is my red axis, so I'm going to go ahead and rotate along the X axis. And you can see in the scene view and in the game view that my cube is rotating along that X axis. Okay, let's put it at like 45 degrees, so it's nice and a nice angle. Scale, not surprisingly, changes the scale of the object, makes it larger, thicker, wider, whatever adjective you want to use. That's exactly the same thing. There's a bunch of other stuff on this cube, but we're not going to go through all that today. This is, again, just an intro of all the windows, the common windows in Unity. Okay, next common window is the project window. And whether you know it or not, this is actually where you're starting. So your project contains all of the assets in your game. So I'll just annotate here. This is where all of your assets are. And you literally see there's a folder called assets. And assets can be anything like pictures, pictures/textures, textures you put on 3D objects to make them look like stone or wood or anything like that. So you have pictures. You can also have sound files in here. You can have prefab game objects. There's a ton of things that you can have in here that you're going to use. You could also put your fonts in here if you're going to use a game that has a lot of fonts. Up here, we'll keep this dark green. And then up here, let me just remind you, the hierarchy is where all of your game objects live. Okay, and all the things up here in Unity are game objects. The inspector is information on the game objects that are currently selected. But anyways, the assets folder down here, we start with the scenes folder that has our sample scene. And that's where we're in right now. We're in, games can have multiple scenes in Unity. Right now we're in sample scene. We can do things like creating a folder, or we can create a C# script. That's the big thing I forgot. Like if we created a player move script, it would exist in our assets folder. Yeah. And right now it doesn't have anything in it, but we can see it in the inspector. It has a start function, an update function, and it's using Unity, and it derives from mono behavior. All fancy stuff that you don't really need to understand to get started with Unity. Okay, you'll get it eventually, trust me. And last but not least, I keep saying each one of these is the most important. This one is really, really important as well. And I'll just go over it with a white pen. This is our console window. And I want to make sure that the console window We also talked about the game window. Well, we already talked about the game window. I like to make sure that the console window is always visible, because the console window is where you are going to get messages from your app/game, especially errors. So this is where you're going to see all of your errors. This is where you're going to do all of your troubleshooting. And later on, it's a good idea to prototype functionality by putting it, outputting to the console. So debug.log or simply print. And you can print things to the console. You can print strings and words and custom messages, but you can also print useful things like the value of a variable. So if you have a variable like I, and you're trying to figure out what's going on in your code, I is never reaching 23, then you can output to the console and see where it's getting snagged, right? Cool. So those are the basics. Those are the basic windows to get started in Unity. And one thing, I'm going to clear my annotations. One thing you can do to get started that I like to assign to a lot of my students is to take something like the image of your favorite artwork or video game cover and make a scene or a game that has that looks exactly like that. So for example, if I wanted to do like a Mondrian painting, I would in assets, I would right click, I would go to create material, and this is how you make colors, basic colors, and I'll call it red. Mondrian is known for having square images where, that's just primary colors arranged on the screen. So if I make this red material, funny enough, it's just a blank material. We can see right here, but we have to actually change the albedo with this color picker. We make it red, and now it's a red material. And I can just drag it and drop it in my scene view on the cube. I can drop it directly on the cube. I can drop it on the cube game object in the hierarchy. I cannot drop it in the game window. So if I drop it here, it's added to the cube, and now we can make this much larger. Sometimes I like to use these tools up here to modify my shapes. So if we make this a nice square in the corner, we can click it and Command D to duplicate it. W will bring up my anchors to move. And now I can move this one over here, and I can duplicate this red and make it blue. And I know I'm going a little quick here, but again, this is just supposed to be an intro to Windows and getting started in Unity, not necessarily a tutorial on how to use all of its features. Those also exist. So we'll make this one yellow. And we'll drop the yellow here, and we'll make this yellow one like a little skinny. And we'll draw it across the whole screen. Now, we're getting a little Z fighting here. That means that both of these, or three of these objects are on the same Z position. And so the user gets unsure results. So we can just move the Z position of this if we want it to stick out a little bit more. And then we'll finish it off with a white on the bottom. And we'll duplicate the yellow, make it white. Great, drop it on here. Good, there we go. And again, we'll move this forward 2/100ths of a unit. And yeah, that's a really good way to practice, is to move around primitive objects like cubes. You can also create spheres, capsules, cylinders, planes, quads, so on and so forth. But yeah, that was an introduction to Unity and its many windows and how useful they are, and what different uses they have. If you have any other questions, please leave them in the comments, or find me on the internet. I'm not that difficult to find, and I'll talk to you then. Thanks for watching.